So, welcome to this Dharma talk, everyone. And today, as I've mentioned earlier, I'd like to talk about uh, the reality of death and also rebirth, how it also happens, and what this means from mostly an early Buddhist perspective. But first, I'd like to talk to you about two dialogues, or like to tell you about two dialogues with an ancient Zen master called Hakuin. So, this is how it goes. A soldier named Nobushi came to Hakuin and asked, "Do heaven and hell really exist?" "Who are you?" inquired the master. "I'm a samurai," the warrior replied. "You? A samurai?" exclaimed Hakuin. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? You have a face of a beggar." Nobushi became so angry that he reached for his sword, but Hakuin continued, "So you have a sword? Well, your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head." As at this, Nobushi drew his sword, and Hakuin looked at him and exclaimed, "That is hell." Sheathing his sword, the samurai bowed with great humility and respect. "And this," Hakuin announced, "is heaven." That's the first dialogue. That's from Kaplo, 1971, let's say. Kaplo's an author of a book. So the next one is like this. A nobleman asked Master Hakuin, "What happens to the enlightened man at death? What happens to the unenlightened man at death?" And the master replied, "Why ask me?" And the nobleman replied, "Because you're a Zen master." "Yes," said Hakuin, "but not a dead one." So I really like that story because I like those stories because I really don't know what happens at death. I can't remember it, and I can't remember previous births or previous lives, and I can't remember what actually happens at death. So, and I'm uncertain. However, I do have some thoughts about it and views, and these views are based on the Buddhist teachings. So I'm going to give you a perspective from those teachings. So the Buddhist teachings emphasize reaching the goal of Nibbana. And to help realize this goal, the Buddha talked about rebirth, karma, and conditionality, and in particular, the conditionality of birth and death. Excuse me a minute, I'll just turn my phone off. And he also encouraged an awareness of death. The moment of death, the moment of our physical death, he said was a powerful time to wake up to the reality of things. And the living can prepare for this moment of death. And to prepare for the moment of death, it's useful to have conducive conditions. It's also useful to prepare by training for it, as I was mentioning earlier this morning. And as well as preparing for our own death, we can assist others to make their last moment a wholesome one. Life and death was considered by the Buddha as a cycle that's perpetuated, that continues as a result of craving and clinging. They're pretty significant factors in this cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. This wheel of samsara, but they're not the only factors, but they're pretty significant factors. And the Buddhist idea of this cycle is not only related to birth and death of entities, but also to every moment of a being's life. And just to give another quote now from an author called Mullen, from a book called Death, Dying, and the Tibetan Tradition, Each moment's consciousness is said to be a product of the fading away and re-arising of a previous moment's consciousness. The present mind is thus a unit born from the death of the last moment's mind. The last moment's mind, the moment before. In other words, not only do we have this idea or this understanding that entities are born and die, like over lifetimes, but every moment we're being born and reborn, and we're dying and being reborn. So freedom from the cycles of suffering or dukkha is realized with nibbana, which has also been called the deathless or the unconditioned. It's tricky putting a "the" in front of it, actually, because it's not really it's not really a thing. It's not really a noun. It's not really. It can't be used like that. But it's freedom is realized with deathless, with the experience of deathlessness, if that makes sense. And I'll explain what that is a little bit later. And freedom is realized, according to Buddhism, with the practice and the living of the Buddhist Eightfold Path, which involves training in ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And of course, you've heard me mention this. Those of you who come along to my days of meditation regularly have heard me mention right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration as as the factors of this Noble Eightfold Path, which is of course this. It's a cyclic phenomenon. It's not a linear thing. It's understood as a cycle or an interdependent coming together of a bunch of factors that work together to lead to wisdom and freedom. So, and this particular path has been described as the middle way. In fact, in the first sutta, the first Dharma discourse the Buddha gave to the five ascetics, he talked about the middle way. And the middle way can be understood in a couple of ways. Well, I'm going to talk about two ways it can be understood right now. And one way it can be understood is that it's a balance between the extremes of hedonism or sensual gratification or sensual desires, the sensual world, and self-mortification. It's a balance between self-gratification or gratification through the senses or hedonism and self-mortification or asceticism, extremes of asceticism or self-denial. And yet another way this middle path, this balanced path can be understood is as a balance between it's not a balance. It's neither leading to eternalism nor annihilation, or nihilism is sometimes called. So it's neither leading towards the experience that we think we're going on forever, like a heaven, we go to a heaven and we roll on forever and ever, never being reincarnated over and over and over again, nor do we turn into a nothing. So the middle way does not incline towards the view of eternalism or annihilation. And when the Buddha was asked what happens to enlightened beings when they die, sometimes he just didn't answer because he thought that would arouse too much confusion at the wrong time for these people. So he just remained silent. And other times he would answer it with a question. He would ask, what happens to a flame? Where does a flame go when it's extinguished? And of course, the flame just goes out. It doesn't go anywhere. So that was the way he was explaining this middle way between eternalism and annihilation. And materialists would be inclined to have views of annihilation. In other words, a materialist will say, for example, I'm assuming this anyway, a materialist will say that when we die, that's it. There's nothing. It sort of stops there. Our consciousness stops, everything stops, and there's just that. Um, However, if you think that materialists are rational and scientific, for example, then they're denying a basic law of physics that energy can't be destroyed. That there's a conservation of energy. In other words, according to Buddhism, there's this principle of dependent arising, which some of you have heard me talk about many times. Dependent arising is an explanation of how things come to be and how things change and disappear. And it goes basically like this. When this is, that is. With the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that is not. With the ceasing of this, that also ceases. So it's talking about conditionality. And so if there's an energetic cause for something, then it will transform to something else. That makes sense. So that's the materialist view, and it's not the view that the Buddha was talking about with his understanding of this cycling in birth, aging, sickness, and death. And then the eternalist view would have a belief in reincarnation, that we go on forever. In this way, it's like considering that a person inhabits a body for a while, and it's like driving a car. Like we put ourselves in a car, we drive it around for a long time, and then eventually breaks down, and we can no longer drive it. So we get out of that car and we go into another car. It's like that with reincarnation. This idea that we have a soul that that inhabits a particular body for a while, then the body changes, but the soul goes on and reincarnates in another body, and just goes on and on and on. And we in that body for a while, and then the body fades away and dies, so we go into another body. The Buddha didn't talk about it like that. And the idea that the soul goes from one lifetime to the next and carrying the same personality and the same ideas of a self is like a transmigration of the soul or ego. And that's not how the Buddha described things. Rebirth is a little bit different. Rebirth talks about how rather than a kind of transmigration of a soul or a thing from one body to another body and so on, or one life to another life, it's considered more like a transference of energy. I mean, it's actually not energy, but if you can think about it like energy. And this life-death process has been compared to the movement of energy through a line of billiard balls. This is interesting. If you line up a bunch of billiard balls, like maybe 5 or 6 billiard balls in a row, and you have you queue up at one end, and you strike a ball to hit this line of billiard balls. It looks like that ball comes along from the outside the line and just goes through the line and continues on through the line and goes off somewhere else. But we know that the ball doesn't go through. What we see and what we know is that there's a transference of energy. There's an imprint, or there's a moment of energy transference from one ball to the next. And it looks like the ball's going through, but it's not. And it's like a sine wave. You know how a sine wave is? It's like this wave. And a sine wave looks like it's moving through space. And we can compare this to the movement of a wave in the ocean. We're watching a movement of a wave through the ocean, and it looks like this wave, this body of water is just moving along through the ocean. But in fact, it's just water molecules and water particles and water droplets, sorry, arising and passing. It's not the the body of water isn't moving. It's just this energy that's moving through. It's sort of like that. And in a similar way, the Buddha taught that there's no thing that is being transferred from life to life, but more a momentum or an impulse. In terms of the death of an enlightened being, enlightened beings, uh, the Buddha wouldn't be pulled into saying either there was an eternal experience or one of annihilation. He just didn't go that way. He didn't go there. He didn't go in arguing a view. And in terms of what happens to an enlightened being after they die, it's like it kind of goes outside the realms of our understanding, outside the realms of what we call the five khandha. The five khandha are five aggregates that represent ourselves. There are five aggregates or groups of experience called form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. They represent what we call a self. And the idea of nibbana simply goes outside our conventional understanding that's contained in those five khandha. It goes beyond conceptual understanding. So it's not that there's anything that is transferred in life after life. And what happens, and what early Buddhism aims for anyway, is that there is no rebirth. There is, when the enlightened being dies, that being doesn't go anywhere, just like he doesn't go from one life to the next. He doesn't eternally live, or he or she or they don't eternally live in a heaven realm, or they're neither, nor are they annihilated. But they are, there is the unconditioned, there is the unbecome, there is freedom. And it sort of goes outside the realms of our understanding, our conceptual understanding, but it is a reality. So with enlightenment, or with the perception, or with the experience of nibbana, for example, it is also called the deathless. What that means is that because it isn't subject to conditionality, it is unconditioned. Therefore, it doesn't arise, and therefore it doesn't die and pass away. So it's a kind of different. It's a completely different perspective that can't be really explained through concepts. So as I mentioned earlier, when the Buddha was asked about what happens to enlightened beings, he answered it with a question. What happens with a flame when it is extinguished? Where does it go? And of course, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just extinguished. And this is what happens with the fully awakened beings, according to early Buddhism. And I know this is a different idea with Mahayana Buddhism, but according to early Buddhism, what happens is that we no longer have the impulse to crave after a body. We no longer have an impulse to crave after clinging to the five khandha being, this representations of ourselves. And therefore, because we don't have clinging and craving, there is no more suffering. There is no more we. There is no more me. There is just what is. So that's enlightened beings. But coming back to the unenlightened beings, what happens? And it's sort of like I explained earlier with the idea of a wave or billiard balls. The billiard balls don't move anywhere. They don't go anywhere, but there's a transference of energy. And similarly, there's no thing that goes from one lifetime to the next. In fact, there's no thing in all of this existence There's no singular me here right now, other than the fiction of me, other than a mental creation of me saying this is what's happening and this is my life and so on. So through life and through death, what happens is there's this moment to moment transference of actions, really. Like it's kind of like karma. When we create, when we do something, when this is, that is. With the arising of this, that also arises. So what happens is that we create a kind of karmic impulse. Karma here means actions, by the way. And with that karmic impulse, we create a momentum to go forward into something else. But it's not a me that goes forward. It is just this moment to moment transference of energetic impulses. I hope I explained that well. Maybe I should just read what I've written rather than trying to do it ad hoc. Likewise, and I've written here, Buddhists think that no thing is transferred from life to life, but a momentum or an impulse. And I'm going to do a quote here. Just as in the present existence, a preceding becomes the condition for a succeeding mental state, so independence on the last thought moment of one life arises the thought moment of the next. And that's a quote from Bhikshu Sangarachita. So this understanding is that when we die, we don't take anything with us except a kind of an imprint or a stamp of our karmic accumulations. Again, remember what I mean by karma here is actions. That's the literal translation of that word karma. What happens with karma is we plant the seed for a fruit, and the fruit is the results of our actions. The fruit, sometimes they're called the fruit of our actions. So hence, Thich Nhat Hanh once said that our actions are our only true possessions. They're the only thing that we can take with us from one life to the next. Not that we're taking anything. It's more like, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's more like an imprint of energy that propels us into another existence. When we have craving or being, we continue to become something. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea of awakening is that we wake up to this cycle of suffering, and we wake up to the way we perpetuate the cycle with our craving for being, or craving for not being, or craving for sensual pleasures, for example. And then when we have no craving, then that the result of craving doesn't arrive. We don't become anything. We don't kind of move on. We stop. We get off the cycle. So the idea of karma is that every volitional action leaves an impression or a habit that will later ripen as a subconscious predisposition. The actions one performs create the momentum of mind. Hence, we hear the understanding of the Dhammapada, the first verse of the Dhammapada, that a collection of verses from the time of the Buddha. If you speak with and act unwholesomely, then unwholesomeness will follow, just like a wheel of a cart follows the hoof of the ox that is drawing it. That's from the Dhammapada. I think that's in the first verse. And the opposite is also true. Act with a wholesome mind, and wholesomeness will follow, just as one's shadow. Just as you have a shadow that follows you wherever you go, when you act wholesomely, that wholesome action will form a way of directing yourself through life. And the way life unfolds is actually the result of many, many causes and conditions coming together, many of which are completely beyond our control. I think I mentioned this earlier this morning. However, as I mentioned earlier this morning, there's a slither of possibility with all this, these causes and conditions and so on. And that slither of possibility relates to the decisions we make and the actions that are based on those decisions, or our intentions and our actions based on those intentions. And this is the way we can change the way things unfold in our lives. Even with, we can't control the fact that we might get COVID one day and a couple of weeks later, shingles. Although we can kind of manage it, we can kind of skillfully, avoid being exposed to those things, and also skillfully avoid getting stressed out. And make some time, manage our time a bit more skillfully. However, we can't control those things, but we can have a choice in how you respond to those experiences. Like I noticed that I've been meditating in the last week since I've been experiencing shingles, and I noticed that if I've had to develop a lot of patience because there's pain. It's not that I get up and the pain disappears. It's just there. It continues to be there. And I noticed if I struggle with it and want it to go away and push it away and, get down on myself about it, it just makes it worse. So I need to accept it. And that's a kind of an intentional action. And that leads to a more peace of mind, actually. So, so you heard me this morning and you just practiced 5 recollections with me earlier. And in that, I mentioned something about karma. But I used the word actions when I was inviting you to the 5 recollections. The last recollection being a recollection of the understanding of karma, that actions that we are born, we are the owners of our karma, we are born of our karma, we're heirs to our karma, related to my karma, supported by our karma, and whatever karma we shall do, whatever actions we shall do, of those actions we shall be theirs. And karma isn't a fatalistic idea or concept, because it is through our intentions an individual can cause or create their mode of existence. It's not that we get punished or rewarded from an outside force. Whatever suffering there is, or whatever good fortune there is, I know that, sometimes we win the lottery and it's not from our intentions that we might win the lottery. Or, as I mentioned just a minute ago, so many causes and conditions come together, many of which are completely beyond our control. However, whatever suffering we have is related to the karma that we have had, that we have made, the accumulations of our karma, and similarly, whatever good fortune we may have, or whatever well-being we may have in our hearts, is often related to what we've been doing and how we've been training and how we've been approaching things and experiencing, like responding to experiences that come our way. So thus, a being is considered as a dynamic continuation of body-mind and body-mind processes. You've heard me say many times, and I'm going to say it again, this dependent arising, there's no thing in all this. There's no thing that's going through all this, but what there is dependently arising processes interacting. Are streams of dependently arising processes interacting. And I'm quoting Lee Brasington there with a book that he's written by that title. And it means that there's no thing in all of this life, but there are many processes streams of processes, uh, dependently arising and interacting. So whatever suffering or whatever good fortune that we may have arises often from our habits of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or their opposites: generosity, kindness, and wisdom. So the body-mind process is considered as this dependent streams of, streams of dependently arising processes interacting. And in terms of Buddhist cosmology, by the way, the Buddha said never to believe anything, not to believe what he had to say. He suggested that we consider what he had to say, but only believe what is in line with our own experience. So he did say, however, that if one had the ability to remember, one would no longer question the validity of rebirth. And according to Buddhist cosmology, the possibility of rebirth has many options. Every being creates their own reality, as I was just mentioning. However, the dimensions of these worlds can cross over and form into realms. And according to Buddhist cosmology, there are 31 levels of existence that can be further divided into 6 basic categories. And these are the categories: heaven, a preta realm. Preta means a hungry ghost. Animal realm means an animal realm. Yeah. A human realm, and what's called an asura realm, or jealous god realm, or demon realm, and a god realm, or heaven realm. Sorry, the god realms. So, and according to Buddhist cosmology, these realms exist in the objective outside world or outside universe, but they also can be experienced within our own body-mind processes. So sometimes as a human, like we don't need to go to another realm to experience hell, for example, or the experience of being a preta. So there's a range from heaven to hell. And though we can consider them as external realms out there in the objective world or the objective universe, they could also be understood as states of mind within our own body-mind continuum. So, and what is really important to remember is that we recreate our realms. We create our realms through our karma, through our actions. And if one is generous and kind and considerate and abides by human principles of kindness, then it is possible to live within the human realm. The human realm is kind of a balance between, there's about 50% pleasure and 50% pain. And, we're able to work within this human realm. If, however, we get caught up in paranoia, we get caught up in engaging in murder and lots of unwholesome deeds, we tend to create like a hell realm. We become paranoid. We experience a lot of suffering. People are out to get us. I think of what's happening now in our human realm, in our human world, and it's so horrific that I think that people are also living in hell as we speak, like going to war. It's like hell. So, and again, it's not through their own creations. Many of those people are experiencing hell through their own creations, but many of them are just experiencing the taste of hell because of what other people are doing to them. So anyway, that's the hell realm. The hell realm is this horrible, contracted uh, state of mind where we're isolated and we experience like 99.9% just unpleasantness. The Preta realm, the Preta realm or the Hungry Ghost realm, is when we kind of obsessed or we're only thinking about money, food, and sex, basically, and following our base desires and base cravings. So sometimes the pretas are depicted as these beings with really big bodies and tiny mouths, so tiny that they can't get food into their swollen bellies, and they're really hungry. Or we could think of when someone is completely in an addiction about something, that's like those beings are in Preta realms, that particular realm of consciousness. I've talked about the animal realm where well, have I talked about it? I don't think I have. The animal realm is where we're obsessed with getting money, food, and sex. And we can't see beyond that. We just get kind of live in a gross world uh, where it's based on just survival and getting gross pleasures. I mean, I know I've got a little puppy dog. I mean, he's really beautiful, and I like to think he's quite he loves me and so on. But I think in reality, what's important for him is he gets his meal every day. He gets a cuddle, and he knows we're around to give him some security. It's not a terrible realm, but it's pretty limited. The human realms, of course, are uh, much more. There's much more opportunities and possibilities because we have this 50% of pleasure and pain. And we have some discernment and discrimination, and we can choose how we act to things a little bit more. Uh, the Asura realm or the godlike realm, the demon realm or the jealous god realm is sometimes called, could be similar to some multimillionaires or even politicians that have a lot of power and they want to keep it. They have a lot of power and control over things and they struggle and fight to keep it. So it's not really a pleasant realm, although some people would think that was pleasant, but it's really quite an unpleasant realm. And um, the heaven realms are kind of similar to what we'd normally understand in Christian heaven, like everything's lovely and pretty, and we're getting lots of nice food, and uh, everything's quite lovely. Uh, it's kind of like maybe going to Byron Bay and having lots of money and just hanging out on the beach, and it's like a heaven realm, as well as quite refined, uh, quite refined realms of consciousness, quite refined states of consciousness that could be considered like oneness with the universe. There's a god called Brahma that thinks he or she or they is everything, and they are omniscient. This is called being in the heaven realms, being in the God realms. And the Buddha talked about all these realms, regardless of their pleasantness or unpleasantness, are all conditional. And it's not where those who are awakened go to. They might arrive in these particular realms because of their actions, but it's not where we find ultimate freedom. Ultimate freedom is according to early Buddhism, come about by not being reborn, not being born back into this wheel of samsara, this wheel of birth and death. I should mention here that, and I think I mentioned this morning, there's a different idea with Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism. And look, I don't know what is true because I can't remember it, and I haven't had this experience, or at least I can't remember the experience. With Tibetan Buddhism, when one dies, a physical death, like in when one dies, they are reborn in a kind of bardo existence, a bardo consciousness. And the bardo consciousness is this intermediary place where they go through a bunch of processes, and I can't speak about them completely, but it's, there's a bunch of, basically our karma comes up, our predispositions become clear. And if we've practiced uh, skillfully, we can detect possibilities and what to be aware of and how not to go into particular realms and go into other realms. So that bardo state, they say, lasts about 40 days or 49 days. I can't remember now. And then from that bardo state, we we are reborn. So in that tradition, you may have people or beings that are awakened, but choose to come back into the human realm because of their strong intentions to liberate all sentient beings. So they, and I don't understand this completely, but as far as I can understand, it's like these beings may die, but based on their strong intention to be reborn into a realm where they can help beings, they come back into a body and are reborn. And there's a big tradition around this in Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism, um, where Rinpoches uh, are reborn from they can predict where they're going to be reborn, and they're raised from an early age to be a Rinpoche and so on. So that's something um, about death and rebirth in the realms. Maybe I should have just read what I wrote. I think it was a lot clearer. Many people are unhappy and angrily they struggle painfully with existence and are limited by their neurotic fears. This is hell. And these people experience paranoia. These beings experience paranoia, fear, and terror. It's hell. Others are trapped by their stingy possessiveness and unsatiated desires. This is what could be called the Preta realm or the Hungry Ghost realm. And some beings are just not very smart and dumbly or unwisely habitually endeavor to fulfill their base desires for money, food, and sex. Or in case of real animals, it's not about food or not about money, but it's more about food and sex and probably property or um, their particular area. Um, these beings could be considered as being in the animal realm. And those who are obsessed with power and control, they want to seek out more and they want to keep hold of what they got and they want to push everyone out. Uh, they continue to want more and more. They are considered as being in the Asura or jealous god realms. So, anyway, I'll continue. There's some of us who have experienced near death experiences, uh, NDEs, I'll call them, and have returned. And they are convinced that in the reality that lies beyond our usual physical human dimensions. The NDEs, I've called them the NDE people, have reported being in places that seemed like the classic heaven or hell descriptions. Actually, there's a lot of people who have positive NDEs, meaning they have this experience of opening and light and feeling in love and going into a space that's like a loving environment and so on. They often remember their experience and it changes their lives. Although sometimes people have negative NDEs, meaning they have visions of terror. They remember all the horrible things they've done in life, and they feel so frightened. Often these people don't remember the NDEs, the experience of the NDEs, because it's just too horrible. I watched a movie. It's called Ghost. I think it was Patrick Swayze and somebody else, and it was made about 40 years ago, I think. And there was Patrick Swayze as the star. I can't remember what his name was in the movie, but he had died and he'd gone to a kind of in-between realm, and he was coming back protecting his partner. But eventually he went to a kind of a heaven realm, which would be like the God realms. But there were some really bad people in this movie. And you can see that at one point in time, they died. And it's like the earth opened up and swallowed them down into the hell realms. So it's kind of like a depiction of heaven and hell realms. So it's important to understand that what happens now is the result of what we've done previously. And at the time of death, it's the same. At the time of death, often it's our accumulations of our actions that come up at the point of death. If, however, we've done a lot of negative deeds and had accumulated a lot of bad karma, for example, it is possible to remember something that's uplifting. It is possible to have a mind moment that's in heaven, and at the point of death, if that mind moment is there, then the rebirth will be in a realm of heaven, if that makes sense. So it's possible to help people in their dying process. And the way we can help them is not by, forcing them to go somewhere, because everyone is on their own life trajectories. Everyone's got their own accumulations of actions or karma. And it will be the way it is. However, in our assistance with people dying, we can create the conditions for them to remember what they've done well, what they've done good. And in with Tibetan practices, I know that people chant the Tibetan Book of the Dead, almost like guiding them through the Bardo stages. And even if we don't have that Tibetan Book of the Dead, or we're not familiar with that particular idea of bardos, at the point of death, if we can surround people with reminders of all the good things, all the things they've done well, remind them of their ethical actions, for example, acts of kindness, and so on, then it's a possibility that they will be reborn in a fortunate state, in a fortunate rebirth. I know in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, often they will ask to exclude family members from the dying process, because if a dying person's about to die and the relatives are all around crying, it may awaken a sense of attachment. And, therefore, what happens in those traditions, as far as I understand, or those cultures, is that they'll exclude the family members and they'll bring in the monastics, and the monastics will chant and do whatever processes that are useful for that person, that being. Now, coming to Western culture, however, it's common that many family members will gather around the dying person. And I think this is a great thing as well. And it's not so to make people feel attached. It's the positive thing about this, the beneficial thing about this, is that the person can start to experience the love of their loved ones, like being around the love of the loved ones. And this is a really powerful way of I don't know, dying and dying peacefully and in love. I remember actually when my brother-in-law was dying, um, he started to ring everyone up, and he rang me up, and he also rang his relatives, and he said, "Look, if I've caused any harm, I hope you can forgive me, and I forgive you for any harm that I've caused you." I mean, he had a really good death. I mean, he was dying for many years. He was ill for a long time, so he was fortunate in that he could prepare for his death. And I wasn't there for his death, but my partner was, and I think it was a situation of a lot of love. And so who knows what happens after death? But I feel from what I heard, actually, my partner rang me up at the time he was dying, and she asked me to chant. So I chanted over the phone. And I got a feeling that it was a beautiful environment, and he would have had a good death. So the Buddha considered that even the most refined conditioned experience was impermanent. I'm talking about the realms now again, and therefore unsatisfactory. And the ultimate aim of Buddhist meditation and lifestyle, as mentioned earlier, is the unconditioned and or nibbana. So, how do we prepare for death? And I've just mentioned how we can help someone else go through the dying process. And it's a lot more involved than just, reminding them of um, reminding them of their good deeds. Uh, I'm thinking of, adding to that, I'm thinking of what happens in psychedelic assisted therapy when someone has a journey, psychedelic journey. And I've been training in this approach for people. And there's preparation, then there's dosing, and then there's integration. But in the dosing, and in the dosing, it's like these people, these beings that are going through the dosing, it's like they're dying. It's like something's dying, like the unwholesome patterns or the patterns that were causing them so much trouble. Um, and the training or the the training of being a therapist in that process is that we have a lot of input in the preparations, and we have a lot of input as therapists. We have a lot of input in the integration, but in the actual process of the dosing, when people are going through their own psychological processes of this, the psychedelic experience arises, that arises with the psychedelic experience, we step back. We step back and just allow that person to go through what they need to go through, and support them if they're in difficult times, provide them with some support. But for the most part, it's providing the circumstances for them to go through their dying process, the dying of whatever those patterns are that are causing them suffering, or whatever the ego is. It's like allowing that to happen in a wholesome way. So, how do we prepare for death? Well, negative mind states are painful, positive mind states are pleasant, and nibbana is freedom. There's a saying from that I heard from Venerable Sumedho. It goes something like this: yesterday is a memory, tomorrow the unknown, now is the knowing. And what he means by that is that now is the only time there is. Yesterday, tomorrow is just a concept. It's just a mental creation. Now is the only time there is. And so at the moment of dying, if we can orient to that, if we can recognize that this is all there is, this is it, then we can find freedom. With that moment, with that realization of just this, with an understanding that yesterday is just a memory, tomorrow the unknown, and yesterday is just a concept, actually. Our lives that are past, they're just conceptual creations. They're just memories. And where we're going to is just a mental creation as well. The reality of this experience is now. When we can realize that, we are liberated. We don't need to be reborn. We are free. We experience Nibbana. And it's outside the realms, it's outside the understanding and the realms of conditioned experience. It is the unconditioned. So, I've raved a bit. Earlier, I invited you to the recollection of the five recollections and a death awareness exercise. And the benefits of death awareness, while we're not actually dying, but an awareness of the reality of death, actually sets things into, it gives us a good perspective on the reality of things. It gives us a good perspective on what's priorities in our lives. Even in ACT as acceptance and commitment therapy, there's an exercise when one develops, there's 6 factors in therapy with ACT. 2 of those factors relate to first, clarifying our valued direction. And the second one, another one, is committed actions based on those directions. So in the clarifying the valued directions, there's an exercise that ACT practitioners will invite their patients or clients to do. And that is an eulogy exercise. It's like, if you can imagine you've died and you're there at your funeral, somehow hovering around, what would you want someone else to say about you? What would you want in your eulogy to say about you? And would you want them to say, "Oh, this is Malcolm. He spent a lot of time in the office. He really worked really hard, and he worked like 10 hours a day every day." Or would you want them to say, this is Malcolm or Bev or Sama or Luciana or Peter or Tali or Lynn? They were really wonderful people. They really valued the moment. They lived a life of kindness and generosity, and they were living psychologically free. So why I'm saying this is that reflections on death, the inevitability and the reality of death, provides us with an opportunity to set what's really important, to set our priorities, to see what is really, really important, and not fluff around doing things that may not have any real meaning. So what else have I got to say here? Oh, it's also a time when we can reflect on death. I've been reflecting on death quite a lot, well, most of my life actually. And I just noticed that I've got to set some things in. I've got to finish my business off before I die. So my partner and I did our wills again a couple of weeks ago, and we have a goal to clean out the junk out of our house, so that when we do die, my children don't have to come along and clean out the house. It's sort of like when we're clear on dying, we get unfinished business cleared. And if we've caused any harm to anybody, we have an opportunity to forgive. We kind of get an opportunity to clean our slate. And even if we don't die, we live a lot freer. One of the benefits of reflecting on death that I've noticed is that we live more in tune with the moment. We don't feel depressed and miserable about the fact that we're dying. More so, we feel grateful and appreciative that we have this very moment right now with all that it gives us. And what it gives us, we don't cling on to it. We're able to enjoy it and appreciate it and let it go. And ultimately, if we can actually let go in those moments, then we can experience freedom. I remember I mentioned earlier this morning that the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing is divided into 4 tetrads, and the 4th tetrad is all about insight, and the last step is about letting go, and that is actually the last step towards nibbana, the inclination towards nibbana, complete freedom. So when I contemplate death, I think it's a really valuable thing to do, because it not only brings me into the moment, gives me freedom now, but it also gives me the possibility to have complete freedom, complete liberation, because it gives me that perspective of seeing my body-mind processes, the reality of these body-mind processes, and it completely helps me see that there is no thing lasting in all this, which I think that insight is liberating. So I think I've said enough for today. I mean, there's so much more I can say. Yeah. John Kabat-Zinn once said, if we can die before we die, then when we actually die, we don't die. Something like that anyway. And I think what he means by that is that uh, if we can realize what's actually dying and experience the deathless, then we no longer arise, we no longer become reborn, and therefore we don't no longer die. We realize the deathless. So thank you very much for your attention, and may we all die to the ego so that we can live a life of complete psychological freedom.